They put handcuffs on me in front of my own courthouse. A cop named Dale Briggs, 26 years old, 3 years on the force, pressed my wrists together like I was nobody, like I was less than nobody, while my briefcase sat on the asphalt and my judicial ID badge, the one with the federal seal, stared up at both of us from the ground. The SUV, he said, was stolen. My SUV. The one I'd driven for 4 years. The one with the parking permit for the Hargrove County Federal Courthouse hanging from the rearview mirror. That evening, he went home thinking he'd done his job. He had no idea that in less than 16 hours, I would be sitting at the bench above him with his supervisor, his captain, and his entire chain of command watching from the gallery. But let me start at the beginning, because none of this happened without everything that came before it. I had been a federal judge for 11 years. Before that, 14 years as a prosecutor, then 3 as a public defender, which, if you ask me, was the most educational stretch of my entire legal career. My name is Angela Reeves, Judge Angela Reeves, if we're being precise about it. I drove a black Cadillac Escalade I'd bought used from a dealership in 2019 with money I'd saved for 2 years. It was my one indulgence. I was not flashy about my position. My wardrobe ran mostly to navy blue and charcoal gray. My office was bare except for my law school diploma and a framed photograph of my grandmother. But that SUV I loved like a quiet, private satisfaction. My law clerk Deja used to joke that the Escalade practically announced my arrival before I'd even turned off the ignition. I lived alone in a 3-bedroom house on Caldwell Street, a quiet, wide-treed neighborhood on the north side of Hargrove that I'd moved into after my divorce 8 years prior. The divorce had been civil, as divorces go. Marcus and I had simply grown in opposite directions, both of us too proud to admit it for too long, and when we finally sat down and said what needed to be said, there were no dishes thrown, no dramatic declarations. Just 2 people who'd loved each other once, dissolving a partnership with lawyers and paperwork. He remarried 2 years later. I put the energy I might have spent on loneliness into my docket, which, looking back, was probably not the healthiest trade, but it had made me one of the most respected federal judges in the district. My colleagues sometimes called me the closer, because cases moved on my calendar without dragging, without theatrics, without the kind of procedural theater that wastes everyone's time and insults everyone's intelligence. My mornings had a rhythm I protected fiercely. 6 o'clock alarm, 30 minutes of light exercise in the living room. I had always hated gyms, the performance of it. All that grunting in front of strangers, then a shower, then coffee from the French press that Deja had given me for my birthday 2 years ago, along with a note that said, "For the woman who runs on caffeine in case law." The coffee was dark roast, no sugar. I would stand at the kitchen window while it brewed and watch the light change over the maple tree in the backyard. That maple was enormous, older than anything else on the street, and in autumn, it turned a color between amber and flame that made it look like something that had survived every season and come out magnificent because of it. I used to stand there some mornings and think that a tree like that was worth more than most things I could name. I would think about that tree again, later, under very different circumstances. That particular Tuesday in March started like all the others. Deja had texted the night before to say we had 3 pretrial motions on the docket before the main hearing, so I left the house a little earlier than usual. I remember locking the front door and feeling the familiar weight of the key ring in my palm, the house key, the office key, the small brass one I had never removed that used to belong to my grandmother's apartment on the east side. She'd pressed it into my hand when I graduated law school and said, "This is so. You remember where you come from when you're sitting in judgment of everyone else." I had never taken it off the ring. I walked to the curb with my briefcase in one hand and my travel mug in the other, into the cold, still morning air, and the Escalade sat there exactly where I'd left it. There was a thin film of frost on the windshield from the overnight cold. I scraped it off with the edge of my ID badge holder because I couldn't find the ice scraper in the back seat, and I remember being faintly irritated about that. Small annoyances. The small annoyances of a person who does not yet know that her day is about to dissolve. The drive to the courthouse took 7 minutes. I parked in my assigned spot in the judiciary lot, the one with the placard that read Judge Reeves, a placard that had been there for 11 years, and walked inside past the security desk, where the morning guard, a retired officer named Pete, nodded his usual nod and went back to his crossword. The first motion was a straightforward evidentiary dispute resolved in 40 minutes. The second was a jurisdiction question in a securities fraud case I'd been turning over in my mind for 2 weeks. I set it for additional briefing. The third was a sentencing hearing for a 23-year-old with 1 prior and a face that looked like he was about 4 decisions away from either saving or destroying himself. I gave him probation and spoke to him for several minutes about those decisions, and when I looked at him, I thought I saw, somewhere behind the fear, a spark worth something. I hoped I was right. Over the years, I had learned that hoping you are right and being right are 2 very different things. Deja brought me a turkey sandwich at 1 o'clock. Rye bread, no tomato, the same order from the same deli downstairs for 9 years, and we talked through the afternoon calendar. Somewhere in that conversation she mentioned she'd noticed a patrol car near the Judiciary Lot entrance that morning. Running plates again? I said, not particularly interested. Probably, she said. There was a rash of car thefts over in the Westfield district last week. Department's been doing sweeps. I nodded, took a sip of coffee, and moved on. The afternoon hearing ran long, the way it always did when those two particular opposing counsels were in the room together. Both of them constitutionally incapable of being direct, both of them mistaking volume and repetition for legal argument. By the time I gathered my things, the courthouse had gone quiet with that specific late-day emptiness that felt different from morning quiet, heavier, like the building itself was exhaling. I signed 2 orders for Deja, told her to go home, and walked out to the parking lot at 5:15. The air had dropped another 5 degrees from the morning. My breath came out white and brief. The lot was nearly empty. A few cars belonging to the clerk's office, a maintenance van near the east entrance. My Escalade parked in its spot with the permit hanging in the window exactly as it had been every day for 4 years. I heard the cruiser before I saw it. That low idle, the crunch of tires on cold asphalt, and then the light, white and blinding, from the mounted spot on the side of the vehicle. I stopped and raised one hand against the glare the way anyone does when startled, and the door opened and footsteps came toward me fast. "Ma'am." The voice was young, clipped, carrying the particular pitch of someone who had decided before speaking that they already had control of the situation. "Stop right there. Step away from the vehicle." I turned. The officer was maybe 5'10", compact build, a square jaw, and close-cropped hair under his cap. His right hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but near it. His nameplate read, Briggs, in neat capital letters. "Good evening, officer," I said. "Is there a problem?" "This vehicle," he said, nodding toward my Escalade, "is flagged in our system as reported stolen. I need you to step away from it and provide identification." There was a slow, cold pressure in my chest. Not panic, because I had not allowed myself the luxury of panic since I was about 22 years old, but the particular pressure of recognition, of knowing, before you have any evidence, that something absurd is about to become something serious. I set my briefcase down on the hood of the nearest car, slowly and deliberately, and reached for my inside coat pocket. "I'm reaching for my identification," I said, enunciating each word with the care of a woman who had been briefed by the world, since adolescence, to narrate her own movements to men with badges and weapons. "My name is Angela Reeves. I am a federal judge. This is my legally registered vehicle. It has been in my possession for 4 years. I held out my judicial ID. The federal court seal was clearly visible. My photograph, my name, my title, issued by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. About as unambiguous as a piece of identification gets." Officer Briggs looked at it. He looked at me. He looked at the ID again, and back at me. And in that second look, I saw something settle in his face that I recognized from 25 years in courtrooms. The look of someone who is committed to a position and is no longer in the business of revising it. "This doesn't verify ownership of the vehicle," he said. The roaring in my ears was quiet but unmistakable. Not anger. Not yet. Something older than anger. Something I had carried in my body since long before I ever put on a robe. The particular frequency of every moment in a life when the world decides that your credentials are ornamental rather than real. "My registration is in the glove compartment," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "If you'll allow me to retrieve it." "Ma'am, stay where you are until I run this plate." He went back to his cruiser. I stood in the cold with my hands visible at my sides, in the parking lot I had used every working day for 11 years, 40 feet from the front steps of the courthouse in which I presided. Through the building's glass front, I could see the hallway that ran past my own courtroom. The lights were still on inside. Someone was still working, doing the endless administrative work that keeps a federal courthouse running. He was on his radio for 4 minutes. I watched the clock on my phone. When he returned, a second officer was with him. Young, female, her expression hovering somewhere between professional neutrality and what I suspected was genuine discomfort. She did not look at me directly. "Ma'am," Briggs said. His voice had not changed. That was the thing I kept noticing. His voice had not changed at all. He was perfectly calm, perfectly certain, and perfectly wrong. "The plate is coming back with a flag on the system. Until we can resolve this at the station, I need you to come with us." "I want to speak with your supervisor," I said. "Right now, before anything else happens." "That can be arranged at the station." And he was already moving. I heard the handcuffs come off his belt. That sound, the small metallic click of them being unclipped, went through me like a current. Not because I was afraid of the handcuffs themselves, but because of everything they represented. Everything they had always represented. Everything that every black woman who has ever stood in a parking lot being told her property is not hers has understood in that moment. "Officer Briggs," I said, and I made sure each syllable landed clean and separate. "I am a sitting federal judge. This is my registered vehicle. You are making a serious mistake." "I understand you feel that way, ma'am." He said it pleasantly. That pleasantness, that absolute, unruffled, almost bored pleasantness, was the worst part of the entire encounter. Not the handcuffs themselves, the pleasantness that preceded them. "Please place your hands behind your back." The metal was cold. Click of the first cuff, then the second. I thought, with a clarity that surprised me by its steadiness, about the key ring in my coat pocket. The small brass key to my grandmother's apartment. I thought, strangely, that I did not want them to lose it. They walked me across the parking lot. The female officer opened the rear door of the cruiser and put her hand lightly on top of my head as I ducked inside, the way they're trained to do it. The seat was hard plastic, molded, designed to be hosed down. The partition smelled of industrial cleaner and something else I couldn't name. Through the window, I watched Officer Briggs lean against his hood with his arms folded and make a phone call. And even from 40 feet away, I could read his body language with complete accuracy. He was relaxed. He was satisfied. He believed entirely in what he had done. My briefcase sat on the hood of the neighboring car. Case files inside. A brief that needed to go out in the morning. A hearing at 9 o'clock the next day. I sat with my hands cuffed behind my back on the molded plastic seat, and I did something I had been doing since I was 14 years old, and first understood what kind of world I was operating in. I thought. I did not panic. I did not spiral. I did not spend a single calorie of emotional energy on what I could not control in this moment. I thought about what came next. Who I needed to call. What I needed to document. In exactly what sequence. I thought about the 9 o'clock hearing the next morning and who would be appearing in my courtroom, and something that might have been, under any other circumstances, a devastating irony arranged itself in my mind with the cool precision of a well-filed motion. Officer Briggs had made the last mistake of his career tonight. He simply did not know it yet, and I was, for the time being, entirely content to let him not know. The 3rd Precinct's holding area smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. They sat me in a plastic chair under a wall-mounted TV playing news on mute, and I made 2 phone calls in the 12 minutes before anyone came to speak with me. The first was to Richard Calloway, Chief Federal Judge of the Hargrove District, my superior, and the man who had been my constitutional law professor 29 years ago. He picked up on the second ring. "Richard," I said, and I kept my voice exactly as calm as I would have in a scheduling call. "I'm in the 3rd Precinct holding area. Officer Dale Briggs arrested me in the Judiciary parking lot 40 minutes ago for alleged vehicle theft. He ran my plate, got a database flag, and put cuffs on me after I presented my federal judicial credentials. My registration was in the glove compartment. He did not retrieve it." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "I need you to make some calls." "I'm already making them," he said. "Don't speak to anyone down there." Not another word. He hung up. The second call was to Patricia Sohn, civil rights attorney, 20 years in practice. Someone who had won a settlement against a city police department before that had become a landmark reference in her field. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Tell me they haven't reviewed the body cam footage yet." "I doubt anyone's touched it," I said. "Good. Don't let them. I'll file a preservation request tonight." A sergeant appeared at the door 11 minutes later. His nameplate read, Morales. He had the specific expression of a man who had just been informed that he was standing in a problem considerably larger than it had appeared from the outside. "Judge Reeves," he said, and the title was there, the title that Briggs had never used once. "Sergeant," I said, "my property, a copy of the incident report within 24 hours, and the name of Officer Briggs's direct supervisor. In that order." He nodded 3 times and disappeared. The watch commander, Lieutenant Graves, shook my hand in the lobby with the energy of someone applying a very small bandage to a very large wound. There had been an error in the database, he said. A plate from Mercer County, 1 transposed digit. A clerical matter that would be looked into. He was very sorry. "I'm sure you are," I said, and I walked out. I drove home in silence, no radio, no calls, and sat in the parked car in my garage for a while after the engine went off with my hands still on the wheel. Then I went inside, made coffee, and started working. Because here was the thing that Officer Dale Briggs did not know. The 9 o'clock hearing on my docket the following morning was a police misconduct matter, and the first witness listed on the case file, the witness who had been subpoenaed, who had an attorney, who was due in courtroom 4 at 9 a.m., was Officer Dale Briggs. I did not sleep. I didn't try to. I sat at the kitchen table with the case file spread in front of me and 3 pages of bench notes to my left. And sometime around 2 in the morning, I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the maple tree in the backyard. Its bare branches caught the light from the neighbor's yard in a way that made it look like a sketch of itself. All structure, no ornament, just the essential shape of something that had survived. I picked up my grandmother's key from the counter, the small brass one I'd carried since law school. She used to say, when I was young and full of doubt, you prepared or you didn't. Which is it? I had prepared. That was all there was to say. Patricia arrived at 7 the next morning with a certified copy of the body cam transcript she'd pulled at 6:30. She set it on my kitchen table and pointed to the timestamp. 1 minute and 8 seconds from first contact. Subject presents identification. Briggs, D. That doesn't verify ownership of the vehicle. He knew you had credentials, she said. He looked at them and kept going. He decided, I said, which was the more accurate word. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:20, changed into my robe and chambers, and walked into courtroom 4 at 8:57. The gallery was unusually full for a pre-trial hearing. Pat was in the second row with her briefcase open. Behind her, Lieutenant Graves sat very still in a civilian suit. 2 men in police command uniforms stood near the back wall. A woman I didn't recognize had a notebook open on her knee. Tribune, I would later learn. My clerk Deja had mentioned a camera crew from the NBC affiliate setting up outside. I took my seat. The room stood, then settled. We are on the record in Davidson versus the City of Hargrove, I said. Before we proceed, the court is disclosing a material matter on the record. The first witness listed for this hearing, Officer Dale Briggs, is the same officer who placed me under arrest in the judiciary parking lot last evening. I paused for exactly 2 seconds, and the gallery did not make a sound. I am not recusing myself. The events of last evening bear directly on the credibility assessments this court will be required to make today. If either party wishes to object, this is the appropriate moment. Plaintiff's counsel said quietly, "No objection." Defense counsel set down his pen. "No objection, Your Honor." Then we proceed. Bailiff, call the first witness. Dale Briggs walked in through the side door in his dress uniform, pressed, buttoned, every detail in place. He crossed to the witness stand with the same certain stride I'd watched move across that parking lot the night before. He raised his right hand for the oath, and then he looked at the bench. His hand stayed in the air. The oath taker was still speaking, but Briggs's face was doing the thing I had watched faces do from this bench for 11 years. Encountering a reality that had not been accounted for, processing it in real time, finding no acceptable interpretation of what he was seeing. I looked at him without expression. "Officer Briggs," I said, when the oath was complete. "Please be seated." He sat. Both hands came down flat on the rail of the witness stand. The courtroom was absolutely still. The examination was methodical. At one point, when plaintiff's counsel asked Briggs about his standard procedure during a vehicle stop, Briggs said, on the record, "I always check all available identification before proceeding with any enforcement action." I let that answer stand in the air of the courtroom for 4 full seconds. Then Pat rose from the gallery, in an advisory capacity arranged the night before, and presented the certified body cam transcript to the court. Stamped, time-stamped, irrefutable. I gave defense counsel 5 minutes to review. He reviewed it in 3, and when he looked up, his face had the quality of a man who has stepped onto ice and felt it shift beneath him. "Officer Briggs," I said, and my voice had not risen by a single degree. "The certified transcript before this court indicates that at 5:19 p.m., last evening you examined a federal judicial credential presented by the person you then placed under arrest and stated, and I'm quoting directly from the record, 'This doesn't verify ownership of the vehicle.' Is that an accurate record of your words?" The courtroom held its breath. "Yes, Your Honor," Briggs said, barely audible. "Thank you. Let the record reflect the witness's confirmation." I set down my pen. "Mr. Colton, I would strongly advise that your client and his union representative speak with the commissioner's office at the earliest opportunity." I looked at the gallery, at Graves, at the command uniforms, at the journalist with her notebook open on her knee. The credibility of this witness has been materially compromised by documented conduct occurring less than 16 hours before his appearance today. This court is noting that on the record. These proceedings are public. We are in recess until 1:30. I rose. Everyone stood. I walked back through the chamber door and closed it and stood in the corridor with my back against the wall and let out the long, slow breath I'd been holding since I'd put the robe on. My hands, for the first time since the handcuffs, were not entirely steady. That was acceptable. At the bench, they had been steady. They could shake now. Deja appeared around the corner with a mug of coffee and said nothing, which was precisely and completely the right thing. The Tribune story ran the next morning. The body cam clip, 37 seconds, my badge in my outstretched hand. Briggs's voice saying, That doesn't verify ownership of the vehicle. Had 4 million views before the week was out. The police commissioner opened a formal investigation. Briggs was placed on administrative leave on day 2. The investigation concluded 12 days later with a finding of failure to follow standard identification protocol and, in the careful language of official reports, decision-making inconsistent with departmental standards and community trust. He resigned before the termination proceedings were finalized. His attorney released a statement that said, in essence, nothing. Patricia filed the federal civil rights suit the following month. It settled 8 months later. The terms were sealed. What I can tell you is that I directed the funds to a legal defense nonprofit serving low-income defendants in the Hargrove Federal District. Defendants who sometimes appear before my bench and who deserve to have someone in their corner who understands what it means to stand in a space where the law is supposed to protect you and to wonder, for one cold and clarifying moment, whether it will. 6 months after the settlement closed, on a Tuesday morning in September, I drove to the courthouse and parked in my spot and walked inside, and Pete nodded his nod and went back to his crossword. I made the coffee in my chambers, dark roast, no sugar, and sat at my desk and looked at my grandmother's photograph for a moment. She was standing in front of her building on the east side with her chin lifted at the angle I had always understood as a refusal. The refusal to be made small. The refusal to let the world's verdict about her supersede her own. Her key was still on my keyring. It always would be. I picked up my mug, stood at the window, and looked out at the morning. The docket was full. The light was good. I had work to do, and I was still here to do it. And the coffee tasted, for the first time in a long time, like exactly what it was.